But it didn't work before, Lorna.
You should keep working or go back to the previous screen because you're still connected.
So what I get to say is welcome to the Keene Valley Library, wherever you are, because you're coming from Maryland and New York City and Rochester and lots of other places. So it is wonderful to have you all gathered here for a night of poetry. If you miss some of it, if you want some of your friends to see it, it will be recorded and placed on the Keene Valley Library website as well. You can find it under Summer Lectures series, and I try and put a link there within a day or so. So this is my time also to give a little ad for the library, and that is that we have lots of programs happening this summer. We have art classes for kids, 3 art classes a week. We have some children's programming, all online. We have a movie discussion coming up on August 7th. We're discussing the movie A Good Day to Die. It's all done on Zoom. And we have a concert series that's usually the town concert series, but it goes up on our website, and that is called Music from the Back Porch, also available on the library website. And this year we had no benefit. And we are raising money, but we also have a place where you can buy children's books as a donation to the library. On our website, it's called Buy a Book. So that's the library stuff. It's all happening and a lot of work, but a lot of fun also. And one of the things we're doing is this lecture series. So tonight we have 3 poets, Hilary Hudgins, who is Debbie Rice's daughter, and a poet in New York City. We have Kate Robinson, who is Sandy Robinson's daughter and Rocky Rockwell's granddaughter, and she's coming to us from Washington, Maryland area. And we have Roger Mitchell, who's coming from Jay. We think of him as our poet laureate in the North Country. So we're happy to have all 3 of you, and I'm going to turn the program to David, who will explain about muting and not muting and social etiquette on Zoom. So I'm glad you're all here.
Yes, thanks everybody.
Thank you. Glad to be here
tonight. And so since we have 3 different speakers tonight, we're going to just try to let everybody keep themselves on mute individually. And we ask that just only the speaker has themselves unmuted while they're talking. And then afterwards, if we have questions and answers, then we can have other people unmute themselves. Okay.
David, I think you need to tell people how to mute themselves.
All right. If you're not familiar with that, in the lower left-hand corner of the Zoom window, there's a little microphone icon. And it either it has a red line through it or it does not. And if it does not, that means that you're not muted. And when you click on it, it will mute. And that's pretty much all that you have to do. So yeah, we asked that everybody stay on mute except the speaker. And who is the first speaker going to be? Is it going to be Mitchell?
I'm happy to do it.
I don't have an order here.
It's Hilary, Kate, and Roger.
Okay, Hilary, Kate, and Roger. Sounds good. So everybody should mute themselves except for Hilary. And thank you.
Hi. Thanks for having me. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to read a few poems. The first 3 are first drafts. Lucky you. These were poems that I wrote during the first month in quarantine as part of a project with my partner. So bear with me a little bit. I'm also very nervous to read for you all, even if it's on the internet from my apartment. Okay, so this first one is called This Is Not a Poem, which seems appropriate since you asked me to read poetry, to read something that's not. So this first one goes like this. 1. It's strange to think we're almost all thinking about the same things at the same time, all over the world, for the first time in a long time anyway. 2. There is no part of me that wants to celebrate any of the April Fools, since their foolishness is quite literally killing people. This was written on April Fools. 3, I'm so in awe of those who are volunteering to help at hospitals, but I'm also in awe of those who have to work at the grocery stores. 4, I don't want to hear about companies enjoying bidding wars between states so that they can make more per mask. I don't want to hear about companies enjoying making more. I don't want to hear about companies at all. And 5, tell me more about who's gotten loud as we've gotten quiet. Tell me more about how happy the fish and whales are now. Tell me more about the man singing to his wife of 60 years through her window. Tell me more about a group of friends eating birthday cake together from their separate homes. Tell me more about how much you loathe seeing your coworker find time to become a pâtissier. Tell me more about your nightmares. Tell me more about the bad movie you watched. Tell me more about the place you'd go if you could go anywhere right now. Tell me more about your loneliness. Tell me more about what the sky looks like out of your window. Tell me more about what you were and who you were. And tell me more about who it turns out you might be. Second poem I'm going to read you, also written during quarantine, is an ode to my dog, one of my 2 companions in this single room. Oh, little dog, curled as a shrimp, what do you dream when paws spill limp? Do you travel in your sleeping while I sit here softly peeping to grassy lands of shadeless sun? Even in sleep, your front paws run. Through fields of steak, you start hunting. Do I now hear tiny grunting? And at last, while slowly waking, you, my dreams, begin. Something is missing in that, sorry. Strange paste, apologies. And the third thing I wrote during quarantine that I'm gonna share before reading you something from before is the poem that my mom, who invited me via the library to enjoy this event tonight. So thank you, my mom, and thank you to Karen for including me in this evening of much more lauded poets. You are not alone, not in your only room, not in that room, not in any room. You are not alone, not in your garbage truck, not at your grocery register, not in your teeming triage. You are not alone in your thoughts, not alone in your heart, no matter how alone you feel. Listen, if you can. We are clapping for you. We are yelling for you. We are crying for you. No matter who you are, we are here for you. We are in awe of you. We are not alone. And from there, I'll just read you 2 more that I wrote when it wasn't a quarantine. This first one is called Snowstorm, which you're probably familiar with if you live near the library. Like the moment after a big snowstorm in a big city stops, or the moment after finding something we thought we'd lost, or the moment after waking up, but before opening our eyes. There is a stillness, a quiet outside the sounds, a flattening of the tall grasses of the mind. In such stillness, there is room to stay, or to stretch out like a plump cat not wanting to share his favorite sofa square. or to dance to the quiet instead of the sounds? What does the stillness look like? Does it look like the space between stars, filled with farther stars we don't see until we look longer? Does it look like an old memory, blurry lines and muted colors? Are there edges to the stillness? Are they soft and creamy like a raw milk French cheese, or paper cut sharp? What does the stillness provide or want or create? Is the stillness nothing? Is it us? Is it all of us? What does the stillness feel like? As with all that is unknown, do we fear it? As with all that is unknown, do we widen with wonder? And finally, following some water, this last one I'm going to read is called Goodnight, New York. It was written many years before COVID to a city that definitely never slept. And with thanks to Margaret Wise Brown for saying goodnight to me long before New York knew how. Here it is. Good night, New York. Good night, Jewish deli sandwiches stacked high without pork. Good night, now empty wine bottle. Good night to your cork. Good night, high heels. Good night, bleary taxi lights and bicycle wheels. Good night on the town. Good night, subway venting my skirt upside down. Good night, impressive museum walls. Good night, graffiti artists. Don't fall. Good night, soothing music at that yoga class. Good night, homeless guy's ass. Good night, fire escapes. Good night, over talked about, but tasty cupcakes. Good night, Buenas noches. Good night, New Amsterdam. Good night from the statue. Welcome to Ellis Island. Good night, absolutely every park. Good night to the dark. Good night where we played. Good night where we worked. Good night, sleepless city. Good night, New York.
Thank you very much, Hilary. Whoops. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Gives us a taste of New York. So, Kate?
Hey. All right. Thank you guys so much for logging on here. And I'm going to start with reading a couple of translations from a medieval Welsh manuscript called the Book of Taliesin. It's a book of very long poems, so I'm reading 3 very short extracts from these long poems. And it's this absolutely amazing book of really magical poems that survives in only one manuscript. It was in someone's library and made it through. So here we are. These are 3 translations from the Book of Taliesin. The first is from a poem titled Cat Godot, which means Battle of the Trees. From fruits, from God's fruits in the beginning, from tree flowers, from tree shoots, from primroses, from petals, from soil, from earth, from flowering nettles, from water of the 9th wave, I took my being. The wisdom of wise ones gave me form before the world began, when I was alive already, and the earth and sky still stretched only a small span. I played in the light at sunrise. Wrapped in purple, I closed my eyes. The next one is from a longer poem titled Angergefundat, which means hostile confederacy, though no one really knows why it's called that. It's not especially hostile. I know why hollow places echo, why emptiness arrives suddenly like an advancing army. I know why silver gleams, why dark water fills the streams. I know the place from which night falls. I know what transformation is in the golden ocean. But no one knows why the sun's breast reddens, blaze of bright color, or what praise is made out of. No one knows why the harp string grieves, why the cuckoos grieve, why they sing, what protects that song, what has sustained it this long. And the last one is from Maggefrei Taliesin, which basically means youthful writing of Taliesin, like Taliesin's Juvenilia. So it's not bad for juvenilia, in my opinion. And this is the translation. Why are plant stalks pale and bright? Why is one night full of moonlight, another so dark it will douse the glint of your shield outside the house? Why do the waves roar loud against the shore? And do you know what you are when your eyes are shut? A body or a ghost or a pale, bright thing elsewhere and enclosed? You who can sing so perfectly, why won't you say? Where does the night wait for the day? So the next poem I'll read is a poem of my own, as opposed to a translation. And it's called Bone House, which is, it takes its title from the Anglo-Saxon kenning for body, which was Ban House, Bone House. Bone House. Oh, and it's set in Shetland, where I worked in a wildlife sanctuary, in case you're wondering why there's lots of like leatherback turtles and Siberian swans hanging out. That's why. Bone House. When I duck into the shed to find a rake, the wings of a Siberian swan splay out above me. White down loosens from brittle skin and catches in my hair as I pull the door closed. It died, caught in a telephone wire last winter, and you saved the wing. Its dry muscles keep Russian summers and Arctic winds hanging in our shed. You gather bones and boil them clean. Flipper bones of a leatherback turtle cross on the windowsill above the bay. Thousands of miles of sea calcified in those bones. Shapes animals held a long time stay. Jawbones rattle in the drawer. Teeth stubble the soil of your houseplants. Vertebrae stud the bookshelf. When we draw the curtains or reach for a book, we are reaching through absence. This one is called Odysseus, and it is about an incident in the Odyssey. If you saw that one coming, well spotted. It's about my favorite moment in the Odyssey, which is it's almost at the very end of the epic, when Odysseus has finally gotten back to Ithaca and he's reunited with his wife. And to cut a very, very long story short, the reason it took so long for him to get back to Ithaca from Troy was because he had angered Poseidon, the god of the sea. In case you were wondering, that's not a good life choice. Don't do it. Bad things will happen. But anyway, he's back in Ithaca, he's with his wife, and he finds out from Athena that unfortunately Poseidon is still angry with him. And she lets him know that the way to appease the wrath of Poseidon once and for all is to take his oar from his boat and walk to a place where no one has ever seen the sea, where no one flavors their food with salt, and to keep walking until someone sees his oar and mistakes it for a winnowing fan. And then to plant it in the ground and make an altar to Poseidon, and Poseidon will finally get over it. So that's where this poem takes off from. Odysseus. The ocean kept you a long time. It bleached you cold and turned your spine to chain-link panic. All you knew replaced by years of water and wind shearing your men clean off the deck. Leave the sea now. Leave the ropes and boats. Leave the waves churned salt white. Leave the tide rising up the beach. The land is quiet under you. At night, your breath is the sound of surf, and terror is back so thick you grab the bedpost, a mast whose splinters your hand feels already, crack of wood snapping in storms. Lift your oar and wait for gray light. Lift it and walk away. Leave the coast, leave the pound of the sea, the scrubby trees stunted in sea wind. Walk until vineyards blur and heave in the heat. Walk until a man looks at your oar and laughs and says a knife would be better defense. Walk until a man tells you there's no ocean where you're going. Walk until a man opens his barn door. The sound of grain pouring into sacks in the dark barn is the sound of rain. It is small waves on a quiet night. He calls your oar a winnowing fan, thinks you are tired from threshing. Here in the inland mountains far from the sea, plant your oar in the ground. Bleached and burnished, it stands in the stubbled wheat fields, and you can no longer say what it is. You start alone for home. The next one is moving forward a couple of millennia. It's called Snowplow Turnaround. And for those of you who are kind enough to be here because you are in Keene Valley or know Keene Valley or know my family in Keene Valley, it is about my grandfather, Rocky Rockwell, Landon Rockwell, but Rocky to most of you probably. And it's about the house that he built in the Adirondacks. And the story behind that house is that its driveway is the snowplow turnaround. It was the town snowplow turnaround. And when he was a child, he went to Keene Valley with his mother, and they would walk up every night to the turnaround to look out at Marcy and say goodnight to Marcy. Snowplow turnaround. At night, you walked up to the turnaround and told the mountains and the brook good night. Good night, Marcy. Good night, water's sound. Aged 9, you stayed in an inn your father found between two brooks. Pines caught the flaring light. At night, you walked up to the turnaround. You held your mother's hand and looked around at shadowed slopes. Bats stitched the dark in flight. Good night, Mount Marcy. Good night, water's sound. The war was done. You climbed a tree. You owned the outlook now and chose a building site. At night, you walked up to the turnaround. You climbed Mount Marcy and slept on pine soft ground where the Hudson starts. The moon turned branches white. Good night, Mount Marcy. Good night, water's sound. Each year, the mountain ferns you planted unwound. Your ashes flecked the brook's anorthosite. At night, you walked up to the turnaround. Good night, Mount Marcy. Good night, water's sound. That was a form called a villanelle. So the lines repeat, as I'm sure you noticed. But in case you were just wondering if I couldn't think of another way to say it, called a villanelle. This is, the next one is called North Pole. And no surprises here, it's about the North Pole. But it's also about my grandfather, that same man. North Pole. The cold's less piercing than he'd expected. No wind, a quiet so thick he feels almost protected. Banks of blown snow unreal as far as he can see. Nothing unearthly, no calcified blue ice, no spectral ice arches. The snow is rough and bare as pastures. At home, skunk cabbage fluted by the rusted water pump. He'd lie in bed, watch dry grass, stubble old snow, and think of climbing, roping himself to the cusped tip of the Matterhorn, leaning back into air. Summits, places he'd almost tricked death, almost left Earth's hold, then come back. He walks a wide circle, stepping back from now to last night as time zones splay beneath him. A calculated pivot could keep him forever in a dazed pause, tracking a single hour through longitudes gathered like strings of a marionette. When the plane roars south, He watches latitudes flash neon in the cockpit. There's nowhere to go except south from here, and the plane is speeding. Blurred snow becomes hypnotic as blue corrugated lines of sea ice trawl beneath them. Soon Earth will be furred with trees again, the land livable. This is called Birds of Rhiannon, and it's another trip back to medieval Wales. My favorite book probably of all time is called the Mabinogi, and it's a collection of Welsh tales that are from the same time as the Book of Taliesin, which was the source of the translations I read earlier. And in the Mabinogi, there's this wonderful character named Rhiannon, and she has birds. And in another tale, we learn that these birds have a very specific quality, which is that they rouse the dead, they wake the dead, and they make the living sleep. So the story that tells us about these birds is the source of the epigraph for this poem. So I'll read that and then read the poem. Bring me the birds of Rhiannon, the ones that rouse the dead and make the living sleep to entertain me that night. So this is called Birds of Rhiannon. Ram skulls I brought home from the fields line the wall and survey the borage that is spread wild up by the house. Its flowers blue and star-like, stamens sharp and black as beaks. The Greeks claimed the plant steeped in wine would bring forgetfulness. I pull dandelions and spreading grass from around the roots, and when I lean close, the leaves furred and fluted chafe my neck. Wind barrels in off the bay, clattering skulls against the wall. What they guard now is space, but they shield it stubbornly as they held the living brain. The borage flattens and rises, flowers peck the dirt. Her birds sang until the listener slept. Memory lulled into blankness from which mind came to fill that watchful skull. And the last one is called Water Horse, which is another trip back to medieval Wales. So there's a mythic sort of beast called a Ceffyl Dŵr, which translates to water horse. And predictably enough, this creature lives in water. And this poem is kind of a conflation of that water horse with the nightmare, which was this sort of folkloric figure. There's a couple, there's a Middle English poem about it, and it was said to bring dreams in the night. And it also had a peculiar habit of building nests in yew trees out of the jawbones and entrails of poets. So if you see a horse eyeing your entrails, just watch out. So this is called Water Horse. The waves, white and maned, lather and heave outside my window. Your hooves pound in the surge. You sleep in the yew tree's bristling shade, swallow their poison berries and live, and come to my bed, breathe their crushed scent on my turned face, and make me dream until I cannot sleep. I'm wrestling in dreams the old terror as it ranges, shifting shapes. Memory rides your back, sleep changed. Keep far away tonight, or let me wake before you disappear, leaving only the dream and seaweed stamped into my floor. Let me see your huge trickster eyes, your ears pricked above my pillow. Let me smell your drying fur and rise and go with you to where yew trees line the shore. Teach me to swallow their berries until I can see the dead coming back wave on wave and live. Bear me into that land where loss is what I crave, where the spear heals the wound and betrayal mends the lover and wind roots the trees to the ground. Don't leave me in this half place with dreams not real enough to show what made them. Stay, let me see your face. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Kate, very much. I love the juxtaposition. It's wonderful. Even the goodbye poem, it was a good night poem.
Thank you.
All right. Next. Okay, Mitchell, can you unmute
Yes,
yourself?
there
There you go.
we are. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, hear you.
Okay, I just want to thank Karen Glass and the Keene Valley Library for asking me to come and do this tonight. I'm really charmed to do it. I remember reading the first time at the Keene Valley Library in, I don't know, 1982 or something like that. And I love coming back and reading here now and then. I thought that in our present state, condition, whatever it is, it might be interesting. Well, I think about traveling, so I thought I would look at some poems that have to do something with some kind of travel or other. So I'll start with a poem called Getting Away, a COVID fantasy. All it would take is opening your shirt and turning a bit to the right or left. The wind would do the rest. The news this morning was everything but new. So we thought again about taking a long trip by back road with a dog and a map and some candy. The trees seem to like it, the wind that is, but they're still here, a little shaken maybe. At least we have a yard to mow and a hill in back of us, and what we call tomorrow. Tomorrow is a concept though, today too for that matter. The past has fine features, especially when handled by Canaletto. Nothing disturbs the barge on his Grand Canal or the dog in the lower left corner. The wind is beginning to act as if it's time to go. We agree, but think home might be far enough away. This next one is called A Train at Night, and as you'll see rather quickly, this is the train a lot of us know that goes from Albany to New York and New York to Albany. And I have had to go down to the city a number of times in the last few years. And this is a trip every now and then I try to do in one day. Get up really early, catch an early train, go down, do my work, and get on what is almost the last train back to Albany. A train at night. I pick a seat on the waterside, a window onto what will only be strings of scattered lights across the river, little shoreline shacks with docks, or up on the bluffs or the setback slopes, small squares of white from the picture windows of the 50s. The river whispers to itself nearby, invisible, moving in 100 layers on its single, persistent, widening downward trestle to the harbor and the seaward currents, and the scavenging winds like those I sometimes hear above the house and the broken spruces and pines, snapping branches, a clacking like mating gannets, trees that have been there longer than people, those who thought living under the ridge or above it might be the right place to assemble their bones. I love the lives of other people, and when asked if the seat next to me is vacant, say, of course. But dive down into the river of argument or stream of narrative I'm in, wondering if this might be enough books to have pored over for clues to the silence. I sneak a look at the book my neighbor has hauled out of his pack, at his face too. I can't read either. One of the bright fingerlings swarming toward the world. I sit silently beside him and his open book, looking at the window. In it, my face shadowed, a few sleeping bodies across the aisle, a glint of light on the river, the mountains I don't need to see to know they're there. Remote presences lean away from us, lure us with silence and distance, closed as an unread book. The conductors doze between stops now. The last stop, its rows of wooden houses and high-backed shops flush to the walkways named for the river it sits by. 3 people get off under orange light and walk separately up the hill and into the dark. 20 minutes away from the last station, and the engineer, nearly delirious, lays long wails of the horn trailing over the valley, though somebody's driving a car alongside us, an escort maybe, a pilot ship, a guide. We slide like a boa into the station, each lugging something themselves, as though in a mine shaft, up a steep set of stairs to the cars, and for me, a long drive into the mountains, the towns peeling away till the road is mine, and a new day slips past the old one, past the sleeping hamlets and farms. The snow by the side of the road, still where it was yesterday morning, though someone is spending the night up on the side of Giant, the car parked by the road for a morning scramble to the top to greet the sun. This next poem is a poem that I was encouraged to write in part by Susan Whiteman and the North Wind Gallery in Saranac Lake has had to have art and poetry events the last few years. And I wrote this poem for that last year. It's a poem called Shipmates, and I have an epigraph to it from a poem by John Masefield. And I just Googled him up on the web and heard John Masefield read this poem. And I won't try to read it like John Masefield did. But anyway, this is a poem called Sea Fever, the first line of which is, I must go down to the seas again, to the lonely sea in the sky. Maybe you know it. It is quite a wonderful poem. Anyway, my grandmother memorized that when she was a girl. As you'll see, she did not ever forget it. So this is called Shipmates. A few months from dying at 89, ankles swollen, a highball in her hand, Granny brought back from her 20-something memory, I must go down to the seas again, to what the poet called a vagrant gypsy life. The one where you give it all to the mist on the sea's face and the white clouds flying. Not the laundry, the mice in the attic, dust. She could lift then only her drinking arm above the shoulder, her husband dead now, 20 years, but the gulls way in the whales and a nightly old-fashioned kept her camber. The last time I saw her, she said goodbye so roundly we could have been shipmates, parting ways in some foreign port, she off to the Azores, me to the Cannibal Isles. I managed only a whisper in return to a woman who grew up on a farm in Camden County, but later found herself in the rollicking staves of a poem. Well, I have to read this little poem. Given where we are, where we seem to be these days, not only at home, locked down with coronavirus, but having to face once again our problems with race and related subjects, I thought I would read this poem that I wrote a few years ago. It's called An Old Image, and if you're old enough, you might remember this image. It was quite striking when I saw it. Anyway, an old image. Oh, and by the way, maybe I should say that the Japanese Americans at the time of the Second World War were called Nisi. Nisi. They were Japanese Americans. They were not immigrants. Not anymore, anyway. They were American citizens. Two boys in leggings, the kind wrapped around the calves of soldiers in the First War. Officers had leather boots in that war. Privates and non-coms cloth leggings instead. Facing each other at ease in a foxhole, their helmets on the ground beside them, one foot bared, its big toe stuck in the trigger guard of the rifle each had been trained to fire, the working ends of which rested under their chins. They were Nisi, Japanese American boys, who volunteered to fight Japan, anything to escape the relocation camp they'd been thrown into. A photo taken on Guadalcanal in 1942 and printed, no comment, in every American paper. which every boy in America got to stare at and see the point of, that it wouldn't matter, that the mothers of these two boys might also one day see their sons dead in a hole, caught going AWOL forever, squeezed between two world orders neither could abide. I do have a sort of family narrative about the last big pandemic. And I managed to write a poem about it actually a year ago. And it's called The Silence. And it, yeah, okay, just called The Silence. All around us, forgotten knowledge stirs. My father almost never mentioned his, whom I discovered died of typhus in the great epidemic of 1918. A man who was mentioned only as he who died of cirrhosis of the liver, who wanted to be like his father, a doctor, who wouldn't allow it. Too hard a life in the days of horses and buggies, calls for help at any hour. Dead at 40 and later buried where his father was the following year, who may have given his son the disease that killed him, working to save a few of the tens of thousands bringing death back from France, then died of it himself, or of grief at having killed his son's wish, and then his son, the man whose jacket hangs in my closet, a white flannel sport coat, 1901, blazoned across it in red, who it was said became an engineer, and someone his son rarely mentioned. Though in the last census he answered, he called himself a salesman of what he didn't say, perhaps wasn't asked. Last fall, on a visit from my cousin, she told me years ago, her mother, his daughter, told her she heard at 8, quarantined with him, his last choked breaths. Heard the rattle when the mouth can't swallow its own saliva. That would have been enough for me, never to mention, never to want to, had I been there. As, for some reason, I want to imagine my father was. How full the silence must be, that's so that so little is remembered. Okay, a happier poem. Traveling. About 3 or 4 years ago, my wife and I had a chance to go do some writing in Canada on what is called the National Grasslands National Park in southern Saskatchewan. I was always corrected by my pronunciation of Saskatchewan. Anyway, it's an amazing place. And we stayed there for a week or 10 days. And one night, there was a full moon. Night on the grasslands. She can't sleep, so she gets up. I pretend to sleep, want to sleep, think if I lie here invisible, she'll at least be quiet enough to be bored into sleep. I'm not invisible, and no one was ever bored into a sleep they cared about, but I'll try. If things just get quiet, if I can possibly stop thinking about it, let consciousness wander away, mime the motion of a prairie, I might just steal a piece of sleep. Come look, she whispers, quick. I give up, I come, I look. Up at the top of the ridge, the crown, the arc of a full moon rising, no farther off than an owl's hoot, tinted by the earth's cowl of dust, a mix of ochre and exhaust, telling us sleep is an evasion, dream is real, and behind the stars, silence waits to be awakened. Okay, for this next poem, I do show and tell. We've just had a poem about the Iliad. See what I have? A little Trojan horse. I got this little Trojan horse on wheels as obviously a toy in a peasant market in Krakow, Poland, when I was there in the mid-60s. And I found out after it was all over that I had been living for a whole year in the same city as the great Polish poet Wisława Szymborska lived in. If you don't know Szymborska's poetry, go look at it. It's wonderful, wonderful poetry. So anyway, in order to repair my failures, I thought I would just put myself and Szymborska together in a poem. So this is total fantasy. It's called A Toy for Szymborska. Even the peasants heard of Troy, watching the centuries slip past. A little horse on wheels, a string to draw it by. The city fell, but cities do that, all over Europe, up and down the Nile. Here an army, there an occupation, patiently endured, like the Poles endured the Russians visiting. Carving little horses to sell at the market on Senatorska. I walked to work each morning across the Bonia large field, in between the cows and boys in snappy uniforms, learning how to march. Hoping you don't mind, I put you into my memory of that year. Not very tall, you've come to the market, partly to look at it, partly to see what the peasants are selling this century. You who have them all in your head. You ask a woman in the babushka if you can pinch the breast of the chicken nesting on her forearm. She has her fingers twined among its legs, which you make note of. You smile, the two of you caught in dreams of some other place than this. And yet, exactly this. Okay, another way to travel is to do it by dream. So this is a little dream poem called Flight 126. And I should mention in J here, I'm now looking out my window to the west, and there is the upper mountain of Whiteface, upper Skybird, and so on and so forth. Flight 126. We deplaned in Boston in the rain. 126, a voice boomed over the loudspeaker. There seemed to be no ramp, just rain, and no one I knew except a stranger. What we were doing or where we were going, I followed the crowd into the terminal to find out, though that part of the dream I was not allowed to see. It is good to have the dark to go to. I boarded somewhere without knowing where, Boston maybe. They said I was born there. Why was mother in the terminal waiting to take me back? Maybe it's flight 126 we take with strangers we almost know and no off-ramp in the rain. In the dream, the last thing the allower would let me see, fat drops of rain bouncing off the tarmac. Now, the headlights of a cat twinkle up on the side of Whiteface at 10 below. Inside, a stranger, all night, rolling snow. Okay, well, I think I will read one more and call it good. I had a relative, a cousin, who was sort of 2 or 3 branches genealogically away from, what we might call the main stalk, but nevertheless was close to the family. And she was an older woman who knew me as a small child and knew my mother as a small child. And when I went there one time, and I was, I don't know what age, anywhere from 3 to 5, she would sing me to bed at night with this song called My Old Kentucky Home. Anybody know it? My Old Kentucky Home? The first lines of which were, the Sandman am a-comin' to my old Kentucky home. Sleep, Kentucky, babe, that thing. Anyway, that's how I start the poem. My old Kentucky home is this poem. The Sandman a-comin' to my old Kentucky home. Something like that. We never had an old or any other kind of Kentucky home. But when she sang, it seemed as real as traffic. In a later and less marveled life, I lived so close to Kentucky for so long, I never went there. Everybody has that kind of Kentucky, I think. A place so big and near, so full of a kind of wonder, you don't need to go there. It was that place in the song she, who never married, sang me to sleep with on occasional nights in New Jersey. So many years ago, I can almost touch her old, even then, electric toaster, the sides of which came down like wings on a model pterodactyl. A flying wedge that must have flown through sizzling piglets to bring back such blackened toast. My old Kentucky home had a front stoop, not a porch. You wouldn't want to sit out quite so close to so much traffic, even though across the highway, a barn peeked out from behind what had been a farmhouse. So long ago, it looked like Moses slept there. My grandparents lived there in their huge, overstuffed recliners, couches, ottomans, accoutrements to the life, hardly Kentuckian, they bathed in like waters into which you might insert quietly behind drawn curtains all you dreamed of being at the end of day when the Sandman set out on his rounds from Kentucky, the North Pole of sleep, scattering the dust of obliteration over all the little New Jerseys of the world, where the toasters hissed and spit in the fury of transubstantiating bread to ash. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Roger. That's wonderful. Such great images, all three poets posed. If you have questions or you want to have comments or want to say anything, please unmute yourself and speak up.
I'd like to ask Catherine. My wife and I just got through reading is it Fagel translation of the Iliad?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean every night we would read a part of it, and I got hoarse doing it, but it was a lot of fun. It's a terrific story, and I loved hearing those that poem based on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kate, how did you get interested in Wales and Welsh poetry?
Oh, I read the Mabinogi right after college, and then I just fell in love with it. I'd never read anything quite like it. I think it's this really specific medieval Welsh literature. I think has this really just specific sensibility, and yeah, I'd never read anything like those tales, and I still haven't. So I got into it through that.
Do you